So good afternoon everyone and welcome to the Nordic Pavilion at the COP26. Today is the 3rd of November and this is actually the finance day here at the COP meeting. And I would say that that is the message already as such. It just signals how important finance and climate finance has become. And that's why we have here much more than earlier also representatives of the financial institutions as well as finance ministries. My name is Jukka Ahonen and I'm the head of communications of the Nordic Investment Bank. We will be discussing today the broad theme of financing the green transition. This will be a half an hour event. It's part of the Nordic lunches. Basically there is every day an event, there is a briefing where the representatives of different Nordic institutions are explaining and briefing you about the negotiations and things around those negotiations. We will have two participants in this chat. One is already there, that's the President and CEO of the Nordic Investment Bank, Andre Kysvek. Welcome, Andre. And the other one is the Finnish Finance Minister Annika Saarikko, who is still chairing the meeting of the coalition of the finance ministers for climate action. She has promised actually to walk directly from that meeting to brief us what the finance ministers have been discussing. Meanwhile, we will be starting this event by discussing the issue with Andre Kysvek. Andre, maybe the first question, when you are walking around here at this huge event with more than 20,000 participants, what's going on in your mind?
Thank you, Jukka, and it's great to be here, really. For me, it's the first COP. I see the sheer magnitude of the topic, and of course the number of people that have joined this event. And there are a few, perhaps, first reflections based on the first 24 hours here. The first one is that there is a very clear sense of urgency, not to say a sense of crisis, something that we really need to start moving from words to actions. That's one. Two, I think, and that's very positive and perhaps positively surprising to me, is that I feel that there is a very strong private sector buy-in. So it's no longer governments and international organizations speaking, but I think we can see private sector corporates, private sector banks have really taken this as one of the topics that they understand they will need to take care of for themselves. And then finally, perhaps on the public sector side, I think the statements we heard from some of the larger countries, India, Vietnam, joining and making specific commitments, I think it's a very big step forward, because it's a global issue and we need to act in a coordinated fashion jointly.
You are representing an international financial institution. Maybe it would be good for the audience to have just a brief overview what actually the Nordic Investment Bank is.
Absolutely. Nordic Investment Bank is an international financial institution. There are many, of course, on this planet. Some are global, like the World Bank. Some are regional. Nordic Investment Bank is a regional IFI owned by 8 governments. That is 5 Nordic governments, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, and then the 3 Baltic governments, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. NIB was created 45 years ago to essentially act in the interest of member countries and their economies. And as of today, we have 2 very clear and strong pillars of the mandate on which we are standing. One is to promote increasing productivity, i.e. to remain competitive in the global scene. And the second one is to support projects that protect the environment. So it's these 2 elements, and the environmental part, of course, is the very obvious one that we bring to the COP26.
You mentioned that NIB is 45 years old, which is a long time, and also the societal challenges have probably changed. and now we have the change of climate. How can IFIs, including NIB, support the climate change, fight against the climate change?
I think we need to first recognize that there is no institution on this planet that can do it alone. And even IFIs jointly will never be big enough. So what we need to do and what our role is really, the story of IFIs is the story of bringing about positive change. We are banks, but we are not regular banks. We are banks with a very specific purpose, very specific mandate. These mandates differ. But what is common, I think, and what is also something that NIB wants to bring about is this positive change, being the catalyzer and perhaps consolidator, if you want, to trigger action that perhaps would not happen without us. To bring in both public sector, and we work a lot with public sector, we work with governments directly, we work with municipalities, we work with state-owned companies, we work with infrastructure that belongs to the state, roads to start with, but also railways, airports, and so on. And we, of course, also work with the private sector. So once again, we are the catalyzer and we are the consolidator.
As we are waiting for the minister to arrive from the meeting of the Coalition of Finance Ministers, NIB has also joined this coalition as an institutional partner. Why was that? What is the background?
Indeed we did, and again we tried to align ourselves to the global issues. We tried to align ourselves to the specific policy priorities of our own member countries. All our 8 member countries are members of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, and we felt it very natural that we will also join, which we did in June this year. So we are now really part and parcel of the initiative, and I hope when the minister arrives, she brings hopefully good news from the coalition, and we are there to stand by to support these actions. Of course, we do it through individual projects eventually, and it is down to us to assess which are the priority projects, where is the credit risk acceptable to us. But we are there to take some of that burden and take some of that risk.
Let's dig more deeply into this projects. Which are the ideal projects for an IFI, ideal climate projects to finance?
I would say the basis on which IFIs assess a project is really threefold. The first one is that we want to bring about positive impact. We check the alignment with the mandate. We assess, how does that specific proposed project align with our mandate on increasing productivity and protecting environment. That's number one. Number two, of course, as a bank, we also have to look at the economics of the project and assess the risk and price our long-term loans accordingly. And then finally, the third element is that we want to make sure that we don't crowd out private sector financing, but we rather crowd in private sector financing. So this is what we would call, value added, that we really try to mobilize other financiers to come along. So these are the three elements: mandate impact, credibility and economics of the project, and then finally the additionality.
Is it easy to find projects which basically tick all these boxes?
No, it is not easy, and I don't think it needs to be easy. But I think we do certainly look through the lens of each of those three elements at every project, and we want to make sure, for instance, NIB itself has set a target that at least 90% of our projects comply with the mandate element. The reality is that, in fact, the percentage is much higher, so somewhere between 95 and 100.
Can you give an example of what you think is a ideal project that NIB is financing as regards climate?
Again, I think we need to take one step back and see what are the issues we are tackling. And one, of course, is this fuel transition, to move away from fossil fuels. So I could give you a long list of wind park projects that we have financed. Also, hydros in our own countries, northern Norway, northern Sweden in particular. But I would refrain from taking that easy route, and I would instead perhaps point to something which we found ourselves a little bit more challenging. And I would bring an example of a project in Sweden, Northvolt, which is basically a battery plant, greenfield project being built. And that is something where, when we mention the three elements of it, you do find that some of these could be challenging, and greenfield projects are always difficult to finance for a bank because there is little track record, there are big financing needs, there is the construction period during which the project is incomplete and doesn't generate any revenues. But Northvolt, and I was pleased to visit them, in fact, about 3 weeks ago, their head office. And it's a fantastic vibe. It's almost like a startup kind of buzz that is in their office. And I really find that we have considered it through very deep analysis. We considered it risky but doable. We went in there, and I think now with the hindsight that their first big project, the Northvolt-The, standing for one, so which gives an indication that there could be more of those factories. So Northvolt-The is closer to completion, and we see that they are able to raise more financing. So they are closing to 6 billion euros committed now, and there is more needed. So I think it is something that we can be very proud of, that we aligned ourselves and went in there with not a big portion in relative terms, but with something where I said we catalyzed many others perhaps to follow.
By the way, we are very glad that you are spending your lunch break with us. So just actually, if you have any questions, just please don't hesitate to ask. Just raise your hand. Think about this as a lunch break and a bit more informal session. So whenever you have a question, just yes.
Do we have a microphone here?
Yes. So.
And Jukka, there was another one over there.
Okay, yes.
So the question I have is it, given the fact that the government is active participant, is the government also making land available for solar development and also financing that?
I take the question is to me, since I'm the only panelist. I think the government has its own procedures and state procurement rules to follow. So I think this, the land, if it happens to be in the government ownership, is most likely tendered out to the private bidders. And of course, you can also, in our region, a lot of land is privately owned. So you can buy and own land, and it's a free market.
Okay, let's have another question. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Harriet Bulkley. I'm an academic at Durham University in the UK, and here with the British Academy that represents social sciences, arts and humanities. And I work on cities and climate change, and also nature-based solutions. So I've got two questions. Are you going to need to change the criteria on which you do your investment to invest in nature and climate change? Is it going to be as easy to do that? There's a lot of pledges being made to do both at the same time, but it seems that they might need different kinds of criteria, different forms of investment. And the second thing is, a lot of cities, and there are lots of sessions going on how to invest in cities for the low carbon transition at the moment. One of the things cities struggle with is having projects that are scalable enough for investment. So have you got new kind of innovative ways of financing that can aggregate multiple small interventions and still view the kind of return? So that sort of, both of those things are going to need you to change the way in which you do large capital investment, I think. So just wondering what you're thinking about those. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these questions. On the first one, I think we would need to constantly learn new ways of doing business, and we would have to change as the environment around us is changing. Let me give you a few specific examples. One is that we have just got our new sustainability policy out there. So we have assessed our investment criteria for the sustainability. We have got the board approval for it. The policy was out there for public consultation, and we are now starting to implement that new policy where we are very clearly moving away from the fossil fuels. Secondly, I would dare to say that we are also, I think, becoming more ambitious overall, and we recognize that to make the difference, we would need to do certain things differently. We have started a discussion with our shareholders and board, first and foremost, on the revised strategy of NIB. Because I do think that in order to make an impact, you need to take slightly more risk. You need to take also certain risks slightly differently, and that comes with a strategy discussion. And I would venture even one step further, and looking at all these pledges that are being made also here in Glasgow, I would voice out the 30 by 30 NIB ambition, which is that between now and 2030, what we would like to do is to support projects that have a very specific, positive environmental impact in the amount of at least 30 billion euros as the total project size that we are supporting. That's what we would like to do.
Are there any further questions from the audience? Yes, please. I saw actually already some advisors of the ministers arriving, so I hope that the minister is also joining us.
Can you hold on one second, because I recognize there was a question also about cities and municipalities. We actually work quite a lot with cities and municipalities on the various aspects, such as city transport, city heat, wastewater and water management, etc., energy efficiency and so on. What we would like to do perhaps is to be able to move the project size that we require slightly further down, so that we can, and I think you pointed out very correctly, that we should need to be able to scale up things. And perhaps our policies so far have been a little bit restrictive in the sense that it's easy for us to work with the bigger cities. We haven't done that with the smaller cities. We need to think, and I think your question helps here, to think of certain frameworks which we can then use working with smaller cities and maybe diversify the risk in the process. Sorry.
Thank you very much. My name is Rasmus Wendt and I work with the government of Greenland. So my question to you is, it's not really a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Rasmus Wendt and I work with the government of Greenland. So it's not really a question, it's about, could you elaborate a little bit more upon how you will actually attract private investors in projects that you are involved in? Thank you.
We have a policy whereby NIB can only finance up to 50% of every project, which by definition means that there is always other money involved. We never monopolize a project for us, so I think that's an important bit. Secondly, we also work occasionally when we try to target smaller borrowers that perhaps are a little bit too small for us to work with directly. We work through banks. And you coming from Greenland, you might know a name, Bank Nordic. We have just got the loan approved to them. They are both active in Faroe Islands as well as in Greenland. And we would use them, and that's an example here that I'm giving you, as a financial intermediary that helps to channel our money to the smaller borrowers based on the criteria that we set, which makes it mandate fitting for us.
Are there further questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, Ruth Matthews from the Stockholm International Water Institute. And one of the things that we've been looking at is that a lot of the finance ends up being focused more on a particular sector or in a particular geographic area. And as we can understand, ecosystems don't split on those terms. And so we talk a lot about our connections through the land and the fresh water out to the coast and the oceans. Is there a way for finance to have a more holistic view of where to invest, what to invest in, so that we really create a holistic approach to the ecosystem needs and requirements and values and benefits that we can have through these projects?
I thank you for the question, and I love your question. If it would be down to me, I would draw the maps very differently. You know, when you look at the maps these days, all you see is borders of states, i.e. things that separate us. You know, I would rather draw the maps based on what unites us, and these are, you know, the air, the water, the seas, but also the rivers, etc., that cross borders, and the pollution doesn't stop just because there is a state border. So absolutely, and since you focus on water, let me say, you know, the Baltic Sea environment is very close to the heart of NIB. We can finance projects that are with borrowers outside our member countries, which addresses part of the problem you're raising, and we have done that. You know, working with municipalities, working with water companies from outside the member countries of NIB, but something where the impact is felt at the Baltic Sea. Within the strategy context, you know, we are at the early stages of it still, but I think, you know, the climate as such needs to come through certainly much stronger than it has been there. Where we end up, too early to say. I hesitate to give promises unless I know that we have the backing of the shareholders. So I would perhaps stop here, but all in all, I think. Also, I like the fact that it's already a second person asking a question that comes from the science area. I think, you know, bringing the science and the finance areas together is crucially important, and also something that NIB has done quite a lot. And I think the future is very much, you know, in the hands of that cooperation of private sector corporates and science.
Okay, and there's already the next question.
Thank you for a very nice presentation. If I work in the innovation system in Uppsala and Stockholm, and if I find a company that maybe could be the new Northvolt, please let me know how is the process if they should come to you. How can they get connected with you? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's very specific. I would say, you know, what we would prefer to do always is to speak to what we call a project sponsor, or the ownership, the sponsor that risks its own money into the equity of the project. Every project only becomes bankable once there are shareholders that are willing to risk the equity or the shareholder capital in that project. And I think that's often the starting point. But we also work a lot with universities, for instance. You know, building new campuses, building new science facilities. You mentioned Uppsala. I was about 10 days ago, I was out in Lund in Sweden, and the science park that is being built next to Lund in cooperation with Lund University is again, you know, one of these examples where the universities, the science sector, and then the private sector owners can work very closely together. And I almost felt that, you know, what is being built and can be built is like the Silicon Valley of the Northern Europe, and I certainly something that we would love to support more.
All right, thank you for these questions. Sometimes actually good questions are as important as good answers. And now I see that we have the minister arriving. So actually I think one of the values of the Nordic cooperation is trust. And that's also when the Nordic minister says that Nordic minister will be present, then the Nordic minister will be present. So welcome Annika Saarikko, the Finance Minister of Finland and the chair of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action.
Thank you, it's nice to be here.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I'm sorry, a few minutes late because the coalition's meeting took some longer time than we thought.
But I think it's really, we really appreciate. I think it's great that you are here because you are directly coming from the meeting of the ministers.
That's true.
And of course, we would like to know what was discussed and what was kind of the outcome.
First of all, I have to say it is very important, and it was very delightful to see everybody in person, face to face, not only those online meetings, because this area is so important and the task is so huge that we really need real commitments to the agenda and to the goals which the coalition have decided to have. That's why it's important to really meet each other and hear the different kind of tone of voices, but the same agenda and a similar target which every country has. The coalition, it was established 2.5 years ago, and many things has happened. Of course, the COVID-19 has happened, but also many things in this climate change area. The coalition's idea is very wise, I think, because the chair of the coalition is co-chair with Indonesia. There is a developing and developed country together chairing this coalition. And the main agenda was, of course, discuss how we can get better commitments to, and how we can find the path which is enough qualified that what we really should do. And we were in the historical moment there, because this was the first time when this finance ministers coalition was together in COP meeting. But actually it's an historical moment also because there hasn't been finance ministers in this institution before. There has been ministers for environment, prime ministers, presidents, but now everybody has realized that finance and climate change, they are in hand. And money, it is a good consult to make decisions which are good for the climate too.
Could you please once maybe crystallize that why is it so important that also finance ministries are kind of involved? Because of course the environmental ministries have been involved there from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And now this is kind of emerging that the finance ministers are physically attending the meetings.
Yes. Saying something about the coalition, it is not yet ready. What is the coalition's role? What comes to this climate change and finance combination? We are looking for the right role. We have now found some paths, but I think our role should be even bigger. And I think my colleagues agree this opinion. There were, I forgot to say, there were 12 ministers online all together in person here today, and we are continuing these discussions in the evening time together. So this was just the beginning of our discussions. I would like to underline what comes to this our role. We are not participating into the negotiations straight on, at least yet. But we all know that climate change cannot be solved without the use of economic policy and financial tools. And one of the questions today was also, what are the tools? What kind of tools we need? But before we choose the tools, we have to know what is the target, how we are going to work together. And one main agenda, which we started discussed in a very deep way today, and I think that is going to be part of our role, is the carbon pricing. Because the pricing is the most important thing to get some movement. So we need to understand the risks of climate change to our economies and public finances. We have to understand the risks, but I also want to say that there are some possibilities. It might be also the way of economical growth to find new kind of investments, new technologies, and the business sector is our partner what comes to these possibilities of climate change and how we can solve the situation. But the risks, they are enormous what comes to the financial sector too.
I think,
yes.
Jukka, if I may, I think what the minister is saying is very much aligned what we discussed earlier before you arrived, that the task ahead of us is huge. and the price tag is also very big. So we need to make sure that the economics in the end will work out. If they don't, we're going to fail. And I think that's what the ministers said, that the finance ministers hold the key to crafting the economic policies and to have a fair operating environment, because we need to also recognize it's not only those, whatever it is, 65 countries that are part of the coalition.
65, yes, and also those international partnerships, IPFS, World Bank, and things, and these kind of institutions.
But the competition, of course, is global. We need to make sure that we don't create an uneven, playing field. So that I think the economics, and that's where the finance ministers are crucially important in that process.
Okay, actually time is running and we have this half an hour slot, but let's take very short final comments, and maybe we start with with André, that what are your expectations for our owners, for the finance ministers? How should they guide the international financial institutions?
I would like to hear more from the minister as to what she brings back from the coalition meeting, because I would like to emphasize that we are your bank. We are here to support those policies that you have crafted and you have agreed with partners. We would like to make sure that when the rubber hits the road, then we are there to provide, of course selectively, but to provide financing to the projects which we think make sense. Even though we are owned by 8 countries, and countries are being governed by the governments, we are not political per se. We can have the privilege of being able to see through the election cycles, privilege to see through the economic crisis. We can stomach those crises and be there both in good times and bad times.
And may I continue to thank you that Nordic Investment Bank, you are also a part of this coalition. Actually, almost all the investment banks are involved in this coalition. And what comes to the Nordic side of point of views, Nordic countries, they are very committed to this coalition, and we have a big role because, as I mentioned, that's a new kind of partnership. There are the developed countries which have already realized that we have to act, and we have to act very fast. It's not enough to think that we have to act 2050s, we have to act now. But then there is also that's an important place to realize that there are many countries which we haven't get inside of the coalition yet. Very important countries, China, Russia, and things like countries like this. But also some of those developing countries that are interested in and they want to act, but they need new tools and they need partnership with the countries like Nordic countries are.
And the final question, I asked André what are his expectations, and now I'm asking your expectations, that how can the IFIs, such as the Nordic Investment Bank, support the countries better?
The role is very crucial, I have to say. Not only those 65 countries, but also the investment banks, they are in, and the financial institutions as a wholeness. The role is crucial. They act as promoters of government overall goals, supporting the investments and mobilizing finance. They are mobilizing the finance, how we can do the change. And the criteria, how you get the money for the investments, that's the key. What kind of criteria you have. And as a wholeness, this is how they differ from private, like commercial banks. There are many international financial institutions owned by states. We finance ministers need to ensure that these institutions add value. These institutions really add value, give something extra, that they complement each other and cooperate efficiently. Almost all financial institutions cooperate with the coalition, as I mentioned. And the coalition has been working to ensure that we are able to take full benefit of the expertise of financing capacity if these institutions. And I mean that we need we have to have more information. We have to have more way to measure what are the best tools. We need to have more research, more tools and more knowledge about this combination of finance and the right tools to get green investments. And that's why the knowledge, the investments banks like this is, they have the knowledge, and the coalition needs that.
Yes, thank you very much, and I think that this will conclude our session because unfortunately we are now out of time, and thank you very much for joining us for the lunch break. We really appreciate that one. Thank you, Minister. Thank you,
Thank you.
Andre.
Have a nice day, all you.
Kiitos paljon.
Kiitos.
Yeah. And stay tuned, there is every day this kind of Nordic briefing at the lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.